Money. What is money? To know what money is, I say we need to look at the history of money. We need to look at the root of money. Where did it start? What did the ancients call money 8,000 years ago? And how did we get to the point of what we use today? And also, money and religion has been closely tied throughout history. When the idea of wealth start coming around is when we have the same ideas of worship coming around the same time. So we look at the history of money, and thousands of years ago, people looked at cattle as wealth for many reasons. Cattle was like the center of their economy. Of course, it gives you food. That's the obvious part of it. They use cattle to help plow their land, to help agriculture. And back in them days, let's say 8,000 years ago, that was, the big business. That was the whole economy. It was agrarian. There was no industry. Over time, people, they barter with each other. They trade this amount of this good for this amount of those goods. But the center of the barter system was cattle. Cattle was the symbol of wealth in many societies in the ancient world. So, in many ancient societies, they started to worship the cattle. And they made all kind of cow goddess and cow gods. And to me, what that looks like is a representation of the worship of wealth in a form of idolatry. Like, we can go back to biblical scriptures. Whether you believe in the Bible is true or false, it is trying to tell you something regardless. They have the moment where Moses went up on a hill to talk to God when he was getting the 10 Commandments, and then he left the people of Israel that he had just delivered out of slavery down in the valley to wait. During this time, one of their leaders named Aaron decided to gather the people into worshiping an idol. He made the people believe that they need a God to lead them because they no longer have the leadership that they had in the land of Egypt. He convinced them to take off their jewelry, their earrings, and make a golden calf out of their jewelry. When you look at the symbolism of this golden calf, cattle is the first form of money. It's the first symbol of money, and it's the first thing people start worshiping. Look like one of the oldest forms of worship is the worship of cattle, if not the first, one of the oldest. And then jewelry. Jewelry is the second form of money. It's the second oldest form of money. Particularly, an example is in ancient times, thousands of years ago, they used what's called cowrie shells that they would find in the oceans. They found them shells, and the priests used them as jewelry, ornament jewelry. And they began to idolize these pieces of jewelry because they sold symbols of status. And through this idolatry, they made these pieces of status a medium of exchange. Or in other words, this necklace of the priest is worth so many cows. Since cows is a symbol of status, that means it's also worth whatever and everything else. And then times go on. In ancient Egypt, they had cow goddesses. And there's a particular one, Mehet Veret, and it was a cow goddess that they worship. And just like any other form of civilization, the Egyptians saw herds of cow as a form of wealth and status, even though the Egyptians have no sign of ever using a monetary system. But they worship the cow for a means of prosperity. They have these legends of rebirth, and that's all part of prosperity as well. And then over time, this cow goddess gave birth to Ra. The cow god gave birth to Ra or Re, which leads to the worship of Horus and Hathor, which is Egyptian goddesses and Egyptian gods. It's part of sun worship. Now, interestingly enough, On the back of the US dollar today, you on top of the pyramid, you have the eye of Ra, which stems back from worship of a cow, which is worship of money, which is idolatry in the first place, on the back of the US dollar. When I think of like religions, they got all kind of passages, and it try to tells you in so many ways that there is a spiritual connection between how a person handles their attitudes and actions toward wealth and their spiritual standings with God and entering the kingdom of heaven, or the kingdom.